Hello and welcome back to the Discworld Lore series. In this episode we will be travelling to the City of Anhk Morpork and discussing the guilds. There are a larger number of guilds, the most important of which will probably be getting their own episodes dedicated to them, as well as collective episodes for the smaller but still interesting ones. In this discussion we will be covering fundamentally what a guild is, what they have become under Patrician Havelock Vetinari, and some of the details on the sources that influence them from our world. A lot of people in our modern world might not be aware of what exactly a guild is outside of the prevalence in the fantasy genre. Well, as it goes, they are a very real historical fact. Some were, and some still are, organisations that oversee the practice of a particular trade or craft within the confines of a country or even within a single town. They were organised in a manner something between a workers' or trade union, as we would see them today, with hints of cartel and secret society sprinkled here and there for good measure. They were often dependent on grants of letters of patent by a monarch or other authority in the region to enforce the flow of trade to their self-employed members, to retain ownership of tools, workshop spaces and machinery, as well as the supply of materials for their particular trade. The guilds were responsible for the selection, training, graduation of apprentices under the guild masters, each of whom were controlling the trade's secrets and the traditionally imparted technologies, the so-called arts and mysteries of their crafts. This was often used within specific cities to maintain monopolies on certain ways of working, local significant materials, such as metals or glassworks, and to keep the trade and the skills needed for them in the local area. This in turn led to the invention of universities such as Oxford in England, as city guilds set up mutual places of learning in large buildings paid for collectively, which in turn opened the way for men of scholarly inclination, rather than simply tradesmen, to occupy these spaces as well and eventually surpass them to become the universities as we now know them today. One of the most famous guilds in European history was the Hansa, more properly known as the Hasidic League. This Germanic guild was one of the biggest merchant guilds in history, a commercial and defensive coalition that was made up of several smaller merchant guilds and towns that were controlled by them. Growing from a few North German towns in the late 1100s, the League grew in power and scale until it became the dominant power in all trade in the Baltic Sea for 3 whole centuries along the northern coast of Europe. At the height of the Hansa's power, the Hanseatic series had their own legal systems and even furnished their own private armies for mutual protection and aid against their rivals. Unfortunately, the League eventually collapsed in the 16th century due to the changing politics of the region, in particular the rising power of the Swedish Empire and the German princes of the Holy Roman Empire, until the Hanseatic League managed to collapse under the weight of its own infighting during the chaos of the Protestant Reformation in the area. While gone, the Hansa certainly left their mark on history of European trade and politics and showed just how powerful the concept of a guild can become. Of course, one of the reasons that the guild system failed during the modernisation of our world was the fact that a guild, when you get right down to it, does have a negative effect on the quality, skills and innovation of the work that they're supposed to teach how to do. Really, no master wants to teach a pupil to surpass him when his trade is his entire life after all, and a quirk of human nature like that will lead guild masters to quashing all 3 aspects that I mentioned in the name of tradition and respecting your masters. By keeping certain skills and technology locked away in the guild system, the growth of society as a whole is also stunted, as there is no communication between different trades, no way for them to learn or benefit from each other, as such technology and society did advance without them, and the guilds became involved in territorial struggles against free practitioners of the arts as well as against each other, all of them preferring to cling to their own monopolies rather than share for the common good, and thus they ultimately collapsed. The social hierarchies of the guilds didn't help either, with the various ranks, which are commonly simplified across the boards in modern parlance as apprentices, journeymen, craftsmen and masters, made advancement tricky too, as if you were anything less than a master you would have a hard time being taken seriously on any innovations you wish to propose for the aforementioned reasons. The guilds, in short, became a lot of self-satisfied old men too concerned with their own personal standing to want to do anything for the common good of the world. And really, not much has changed there, has it? On the Discworld, however, the guilds have had a slightly better time of it. There are in fact approximately 300 guilds registered in Anhk Morpork, although we don't know the names of all of them. Some guilds have been in existence for centuries, and some of these oldest are modern forms of ancient syndicates. Many guilds take in orphans and train them up in the guild schools, giving them skills for a life career within the guild's trade. Each guild as such has its own traditional surnames, such as Doughy, Clockson or Ludd for the bakers, clockmakers or thieves respectively, which are a telling sign of this heritage even when venerable guild leaders have them, and there is certainly no mark of shame in having a guild surname. In addition to this, before the advent of free hospitals in Anhk, for their many hundreds of years of existence, the guilds would hire their own physicians and run their own private hospitals for members, giving another incentive to sign up under their jurisdiction if you happen to ply their trade. Now, for these years under the kings and early patricians, the guilds were self-regulating and as such rather unofficial for all that. The assassins were a society of gentlemen and thus accepted among the upper classes, as gentlemen were respectful of the trades of a fellow gentleman, especially when one is very professional about stylish and elegant inhumations, which is so much more sophisticated than common murdering. The Thieves Guild, however, is much more unofficial and a street-level organisation for most of its history. It was only made official under Lord Vetinari, whose approach to the guilds is unique in the city's history and has contributed greatly to their growth and the growth of the whole city. His plan was simple: give them civil power that they acted like they had anyway, and then make them responsible for actually maintaining that part of society. And if they weren't, they were under pain of being, shall we say, replaced by someone who could do that job more capably if they failed to do so. In particular, he made the Thieves Guild responsible for regulating theft in the city. If the City Watch would catch a thief, then they would go through the normal judicial processes, but unlicensed thieves would cut into the bottom line of guild members and upset the paying customers. And yes, the Thieves Guild does have paying customers, people who pay the guild a modest fee not to be stolen from annually, which saves everyone time all round. So if the guild does get their hands on someone who's been trying to get away with plying thievery without membership, they will put them, or at least bits of them, in public places where they can be seen by those who might also get the idea that they could safely put a good thing that the guilds have at risk with use of unauthorised crime. One of the most popular spots is the guild house's weather vane, as it goes, so that those who would try to defy them can see in a very real way which way the wind is blowing in every sense of the term. All across the city of Anhk Morpork, Vetinari made arrangements with every guild, establishing, ratifying, and generally helping them become a bit more organised. In particular, he followed up on the forgotten promises of his predecessor and worked with women such as Rosemary Palm in organising the Seamstresses Guild into their own official organisation to organise the safety of members and reasonable rates, as well as safety for the seamstresses' customers. With all the guilds given strict oversight of a certain aspect of the city, and with all the leaders reporting to Vetinari, he had been able to turn the whole city into a well-oiled machine of gears of all sizes that worked towards a common good. As such advances would benefit the city were always encouraged, while those that were not would quietly disappear. It may be seen that Vetinari uses these situations to test if a guild is doing its job, as seen in the case of the guilds of musicians and engravers, which are covered at length in the books Soul Music and The Truth, respectively. To start with the engravers, for the longest time, the Guild of Engravers had kept a practice of keeping movable type down to maintain their own status quo in the city, preferring their own method of providing print than the fast and easy movable type invented by the dwarfs. But, after the success of the medium allowed the men, women, and dwarves that began the founding of the Times of Anhk Morpork, the first newspaper of the city, to thoroughly trump the guild at its own game, the guild expanded its charter to be the Guild of Engravers and Printers for the good of everyone. Meanwhile, the musicians, with them we get a very clear look at Vetinari's operating style, as with the internal monologues of the guild secretary Mr. Cleet, we find out in no uncertain terms that if the guild does not do something about the massive spike in unlicensed musicians brought about by the band with rocks in, then the guild will not be performing its function, and thus, in principle, might as well not exist, and so in short order will, in a very real way, not exist. Vetinari does not really mess around in this regard. In short, the guilds are the backbone of the workings of the largest city on the disc, keeping its sprawling masses occupied and organised, making sure that their members and customers both get the best out of life in the big city. As to the specific details and the histories of each guild, they will need to be covered as topics of their own, but for now I hope I've been able to provide a comprehensive summary of the guilds of Anhk Morpork and their role in the world. If you have any particular guilds you'd like to see me cover first in our tour of them, do feel free to let me know in the comments down below, give the video a like or subscribe to keep track of the series, and until that time, I've been Albion, bye for now.